Thank you so much. Thank you for your support. Thank you, Mitch Gross, for your endorsement and for your leadership in this community. Thank you to Alex for sharing your story. Thank you to Janice for the work that is going on right now in building the party of the Johnson County Democrats. We are never going to be caught treating the Oval Office like it's the only office that matters. We got to win up and down the ticket, and we got to win across the country. I want to begin by inviting you to picture in as much detail a day that is coming one way or the other to the United States of America. And that is the day that the sun comes up over the United States and Donald Trump is no longer the president of this country. Now, I think we're all ready for that day. It can't come soon enough. We got to put the chaos behind us. We got to put the corruption behind us. We've got to move out from the days when a tweet emanating from the Oval Office sets us wondering all day what policy just changed and surprised our own generals. I want to acknowledge our friends who just came through too. This is a competitive process. That's fine. We welcome and support and hope to win over anybody who is not yet with us, and we appreciate and respect what anybody else has to say. Although I would humbly suggest that it is better to do it by lifting up your own candidate than trying to tear down others. Because of the 20 or 25 or however many people ran for president and are running for president as Democrats, all but one will not be the nominee. And the moment we have a nominee, we have got to rally around that nominee to make sure that that day comes. So when that day comes, we're definitely going to be relieved of some of the problems we're facing right now as a country. But part of why I'm asking you to hold in your mind that image, feel what it will be like when the sun comes up that day, is to remind you that our country's problems aren't going to go away. Mitch is right. That's when the work begins. So let's think about what will be required of our president on that day. First of all, we're going to need somebody who can unite this country, because we will be more divided, more polarized, more torn up over politics than we are even now. If you just think about everything that we are up against and everything that we have been through and everything we are about to go through, we're going to need somebody who can call this country to remember that we are all in this together. But something else will also be true, and that is that in this country we will be facing crises, emergencies that are underway right now. They are only getting more serious, and they did not take a vacation during the impeachment process. They need action. This country needs action. The sun will be coming up over a climate that is just a few years away from the point of no return. The sun will be coming up over an economy where, sure, it's nice that the Dow Jones is looking good, but more and more Americans are finding they got to fight just to hold on to what you've got, because even when wages do go up, they don't go up nearly as fast as the cost of retirement and health and other costs in this country. So let's talk about what it means to have an economy that works for us. The sun will be coming up over a country where kids are learning active shooter drills before they are old enough to know how to read. That is an emergency requiring immediate action from the next American president. So, think about what it means that those two things are true at once. On one hand, we will be divided and need a president who can bring us together. And on the other hand, we're going to need bold action in order to deal with these crises and these problems that are facing this country. That's what is required of the next American president, the ability to motivate, galvanize, not polarize the American people to deal with these issues. And that is the kind of president that I am running to be for the United States of America. And the good news is we already have a roadmap for how to do it. And the roadmap is to follow the values that we share as Americans. Values that do not belong to one political party, and that, if you take them seriously, lead us in a progressive direction. Let's consider values like love of country. Let's consider what it means to honor the American flag and the republic for which it stands. I am, when I speak of patriotism, speaking about something a little deeper and a little richer than the cheap nationalism of a president who thinks he honors the flag by hugging it, literally, on his way onto a stage. Or who thinks that he honors the military by throwing out military justice in a war crimes case and contributing to the slander that a war fighter is a war criminal as if there is no difference. That's not patriotism. I'm talking about a love of country that begins with the understanding that our country is made of people. You cannot love a country if you hate half of the people in it. Patriotism requires more of us than that. Loving our country, protecting our country, requires a completely different approach to how the United States stands in the world. As an American, I never again want to see the President of the United States being laughed at by our allies as well as our adversaries. And when I am your Commander-in-Chief, that will not happen. I'm talking about an America that is leading the world on the challenges of our time, from cybersecurity to terrorism to global climate change. And the time has come to face up to the fact that climate change is the global security threat of our time and lead the world in doing something about it. But protecting our country starts right here at home. That's why if we're serious about protecting our country, that begins by protecting our communities, and that is why the time has come, in the name of national security, to make sure that we never again let the Second Amendment be used as an excuse to do nothing at all when it comes to gun violence and gun suicide in this country. We need background checks, we need red flag laws, we need to do real things to keep this country safe. That's what I mean when I talk about love of country and patriotism. These are values we could come together around, but they pit us against each other according to the very values that we're supposed to share. Look at what they do with faith as a way to tell some people they don't belong. First of all, the Constitution of the United States is very clear that our country and our government belong to people of every religion and of no religion equally. That is a core principle of the United States of America. But it's also time for us to send a message to those who are guided by faith principles. And that is that I am offering a White House that you won't have to look at on the news and ask yourself, when we see, for example, cutting SNAP benefits and taking food stamps away from people, you don't have to ask yourself, whatever happened to I was hungry and you fed me? When we see kids being torn out of the arms of their parents at the borders, you got to ask, whatever happened to I was a stranger and you welcomed me? I am offering a presidency where you will never have to scratch your head and wonder whatever happened to the least of these, because every moral tradition calls on us to uphold the golden rule and do better than we see happening in this White House today. Values like democracy. I'm not just talking about democracy as a political system. I'm talking about democracy as a moral value, that it matters that we make sure that every voter counts and that every vote is counted. That is what it means to lift up democracy. So we're not a democracy as long as the outcomes of elections are changed by voter suppression anywhere in this country, which is why we need a 21st Century Voting Rights Act to make sure everybody gets to exercise those rights. That's why we got to do something about districts being drawn to where politicians get to pick out their voters instead of the other way around. That's why we got to do something about money in politics. It's why our fellow U.S. citizens in D.C. and Puerto Rico deserve real political representation. And I would even argue in a democracy, we should pick our president by counting up all of the votes and giving it to the person who got the most, like we do in every other election. These are the values that show us what we need to do as a country. And the one that's most on my mind is freedom. Because we need to make sure freedom doesn't get shrunk and put into a jar the way it sometimes is in Washington today by people who think all that matters to deliver freedom is to cut every program, every tax, every regulation you've ever seen. That's not enough to deliver freedom. I am not interested in preserving Amazon's freedom to not pay any federal income taxes at all next year. They'll be just fine. I'm talking about the freedom to live a life of your choosing. That's what I think American freedom is about. And sometimes that does require that we get government out of the way. That's why it matters that we get government out of the business of dictating to women what their reproductive health care choices ought to be, for example. That's a question of freedom, for sure. But sometimes securing freedom requires that the public sector step up. That's something we understand at the local level. We expect the public sector to step up and pave the roads and deliver water, because you're not free if you don't know where your water is going to come from and that it'll be safe. It's why we expect quality public schools in our communities, and it's why it's time for Washington to have a Secretary of Education who believes in public education and supports our teachers while we're at it. And I would argue that the time has come, in the name of American freedom, for us to make sure that everybody has health care, because you're not free if you don't. That's why I believe in Medicare for all who want it. In other words, we take a version of Medicare, we make it available to anybody who wants to participate, but I trust you to decide whether you want it, and if you'd rather be on a different plan, that's fine by me, as long as we see to it that there is no such thing as an uninsured American, and get everybody covered one way or the other. These are the values that can guide us as we work toward the urgent action that our country needs in order to meet things that cannot wait another minute. It can't wait 10 years. It can't wait 4 years. We can't wait any longer to do something about our climate, to do something about gun violence. We can't wait any longer to see to it that mental health and addiction in this country get the same resources and the same discussion as medical issues that are physical in nature. We got to do that now. Lives are on the line. We can't wait to do something about long-term care, to make sure that we have a better answer for folks whose loved ones require it than to tell them to spend themselves into poverty and let Medicaid pick up the tab. We can't wait to do something about that, because every one of us ages each passing year. We got to act. We can't wait to do something about racial injustice in this country. And this is as urgent in a room full of mostly white voters as it is in any other room, because the entire country's future depends on ensuring that race has no bearing on your health, wealth, or life expectancy in the United States of America. We all must see to it that this gets done in our time. All of us have a responsibility, and all of us have an opportunity to be part of this different future. And when we get it right, everything will feel different and better. Not because everything will be fixed. There will always be another hill to climb. But because we'll be able to see where we're going. Look, sometimes you have to fight. But I'm never going to let us get so caught up in the fighting that it feels like fighting is all we've got. The point is not the fight. The point is what's on the other side of the fight. And that is what we are solving toward each passing day. It's what we're fighting for. And what I see through the fight, on the other side of the fight, is an American experience that is defined not by exclusion, but by belonging. Because we have a crisis of belonging in our country right now. People are getting the message that you don't belong. For different reasons, for different people. Some people are hearing it because of disability, because of race, because of religion, because of who you are, who you love, or what language you speak at home. People are hearing the message that you don't belong. And my message is, yes, you do, and America can't make it without you. We're all in this together. And we're building a movement that reflects that. I want our campaign to show, not tell, the kind of White House that I am proposing to establish. When I ask you, if you were a supporter, to become part of this movement and go out and tell the others. When I ask you, if you're almost a supporter, to make that decision and commit to caucus for me in February. I'm asking you to become part of an effort that calls everyone in. We are calling out to progressives. We are calling out to moderates. And we're even calling out to those future former Republicans I meet everywhere I go who are ready for a change because we can't go on like this with what we have right now in the White House. All of us need to be part of this together. And when we have that, then we will have even more than a presidency where you can turn on the news and feel your blood pressure go down a little bit instead of the roof, although I'm very pleased to offer that as a sort of side public health benefit to my presidency. But what we'll have most of all is the ability to face the issues that our country confronts and know that we are justified in feeling the hope that propels us to action. The hope that we will be able to have something to tell our kids in a few short years that sometimes is hard to explain right now. It is hard to look kids in the eye right now and explain to them what is happening in this country. But it will feel a lot better in a few short years when we can say to them, okay, sorry things got as bad as they did by 2019, but look at what we did to make you proud in 2020 and make the life of this country better for all of us. We'd feel so proud. That's what this is about. So, since our early days campaigning in Iowa, I have found that our numbers are growing and our gatherings get less intimate than they used to be. But I've still never seen a room large enough that we couldn't have a conversation. So what we've done is we've gathered up questions as you were coming in. We got them in our famous fish bowl. You've already met some of our great team members like Alex. Now I'd like you to welcome another Pete for America team member to the stage. She's going to be your voice, manage the question and answers. Please welcome V. Ann Singh to our stage right now.
Can you guys hear me? Okay,
There we go.
there it is. Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for coming out. What are your feelings about private prisons?
By the way, if the question is from you, just give a shout and a wave so I know to look in your general direction. My feelings about private prisons are very simple. They shouldn't exist. They shouldn't exist because nobody should have a profit motive to make sure that more Americans are incarcerated. We're already the most incarcerated country in the world. If incarceration made us safer, we'd be the safest country in the world. We're not, so we know something is wrong. And in my community, we've seen a lot of cases, especially with nonviolent drug offenses, where people are growing up without a parent due to incarceration that is now clearly doing much more harm than the offense that it was intended to address. So eliminating private prisons is one of many important steps we must take to ensure that we cut by half the incarcerated population of this country, and when we do, we will be safer than we were before.
Access to voting. What about the Voting Rights Act?
Yes, good. Again, if that was you, just give a shout. Or hi. All right. So as I shared earlier, I think this is critically important as one of the values that lifts us up as a country. And yet we see different forms of voter suppression constantly. We see racially motivated voter suppression. For example, in Georgia, Stacey Abrams would be the governor right now if it weren't for the games that they played with voter purges and other things there. In New Hampshire, they're suppressing the student vote. They want to make it harder for students to vote there because they think they might vote Democrat. Now, the way I see it is, if in order to win the election you need fewer people to vote, that could be an indication that your policies need to be changed. But that's just me. The bottom line is that we need a 21st Century Voting Rights Act to protect the right to vote, both from old-fashioned and newfangled means of getting in the way of that right. And that includes making sure that Election Day is a holiday, automatic voter registration, automatic reinstatement when people leave incarceration, and ensuring that any effort to suppress the vote is met with a federal response, because it harms the entire country when we see people denied their vote, especially when it is happening on racial grounds, as happens far too often to this day in the United States. We need teeth in the Voting Rights Act to do something about that.
If Trump is convicted and goes to jail, would you consider pardoning him?
Ugh. Well, let me say two things. One, the clemency powers of the presidency could be an important part of how we reduce the over-incarceration of the country when it comes to things like nonviolent drug offenses. But corrupt politicians are not what I have in mind when I think about why the clemency power is there. The second thing I'll say, in all seriousness, is that while there is a lot of evidence of potential criminal wrongdoing in and around this presidency, I mean, just think about how many people connected with him are pleading guilty or being convicted of things. I also believe that a Department of Justice that is empowered to act independently will sort these things out without any involvement from the political side. In other words, the less those prosecution decisions have to do with the Oval Office, the better, because I trust them to do the right thing, especially the folks I'm going to appoint.
What is your plan for gun control?
All right, so America is ready to act when it comes to keeping our communities safe. And don't let anybody tell you that we're in the wrong or in the minority on this. Because the truth is, there is a powerful American majority, not only among Democrats, but among Republicans, among gun owners, to do the right thing. Not so much in Congress, but among the American people. And I have seen young people taking to the streets, their parents and grandparents at their side cheering them on, and it is turning the tide on the ability to do something about this. What are we going to do? Universal background checks, including closing the loopholes that allow people to get guns without them. 2, red flag laws that can disarm domestic abusers and help us out in cases where somebody is known to be a danger and their family is terrified and can't do anything to make sure somebody doesn't have access to a firearm. And by the way, when we're talking about gun violence, we have to talk about gun suicide as a big part of that, and red flag laws would help save thousands of lives from suicide. 3rd, The kinds of weaponry that I trained on in the military and carried in a war zone have no business being sold for profit anywhere near an American school or neighborhood or church or mosque or synagogue. When we take those common sense steps, we may not be able to prevent every single tragedy, but don't let anybody say that's an excuse to do nothing at all. We will save thousands of lives, and we must. We must. And when I'm president, we will.
What is the major item you would work on first? Healthcare or climate change?
So, look, there's going to be no shortage of things on the list for the next president to deal with, requiring, as I said, immediate action. Clearly, we've got to act on healthcare. We've got to act on a whole set of issues. Climate being incredibly urgent because it is existential, it is pressing, and we must lead the world in doing something about it. But I'll say this, every issue that I care about, every issue that we need action on, whether it's climate, whether it's health, whether it is economic justice and racial inequality, is going to be harder to fix as long as our democracy is out of whack. And so we need to make sure that through voting rights, through every measure available to us, we improve our government itself, because that is the issue of how we deal with all the issues. And it needs attention on day one alongside all of these other urgent questions.
Explain your health care plan.
All right. Since I already talked about the Medicare for all who want it, and again, if that was you, just give a holler or wave and I'll try to look in your general. That's probably more than one person had something along those lines when they came in here. All right, so I explained the Medicare for all who want it bit, right? We take a version of Medicare, anyone can buy into it. We have subsidies so that it is affordable for everybody. That's very important. But, you know, if you're, for example, if you're a union member, you negotiated a good plan, and you gave up wages in order to do it, I will not kick you off of that plan because I think you ought to be able to decide. So that's the coverage part. But the funny thing is, we're debating insurance like it's the only part of the healthcare story that matters. There's a lot more that we got to do. We got to do something about prescription drug prices, the affordability of care. And when I am president, not only will we take the common sense step of allowing Medicare to actually negotiate the prices of the drugs that we buy, on behalf of the American people, but we're also going to regulate bad actors who increase the prices of desperately needed pharmaceutical processes and products, not because they have to, but because they can. When I am president, any company that raises the price of any life-saving medication faster than the rate of inflation, without justification showing they had no choice, will receive such stiff tax penalties that they will never do it again. We have got to act on cost. My healthcare vision includes acting on health inequity. Right now, a black woman is 3 times as likely to die related to childbirth as a white patient. Black patients are dramatically more likely to experience mortality from cancer or diabetes. We have to act on that, and we will set up a national health equity strategy for every community and fund it. We're going to act on making sure that mental health and addiction are supported by ensuring we have providers everywhere, that our schools get the resources they need for mental health first aid. And in addition to all of the policies that have to change, we just need as a country, and I will lead this cultural change as president, to make it okay to talk about and work on, to make it as commonplace and safe to talk about when someone you love has bipolar disorder as we would when someone you love has cancer, to make it as routine to talk about fighting addiction as we do getting a knee surgery, because these are not moral failings, they are medical issues, and they deserve to be treated with respect, with dignity, and with urgency.
What is your plan to support kids and families with autism?
Great question. I couldn't help but notice, by the way, that an old friend is here. Bridget, sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm really excited to see you again. Thank you. And is that where the question came from? Oh, hello. Thanks for being here. So the reason I mentioned Bridget is that she came up to me over the summer, and it was when I really knew our campaign was on the right track. She let us know that our campaign helped her understand that she belonged and helped her feel that she could go out, be herself, talk about what she believed in, and not be ashamed of having autism. And I'm so glad she's become a friend of mine and a friend of this campaign. And I'm glad to see you're doing well. And I want to thank you for raising this question. I'm glad to see you too. First of all, we have to recognize that our fellow Americans with autism have so much to contribute, just as much as everybody else. And so if we fail to support you, we're cheating ourselves of everything you have to contribute. So let's change the culture in how we talk about this and make sure that we're changing the policy in supporting kids with any number of disabilities, from autism to any other issue you could face in school. That means fully funding the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act so that the federal government's doing its job and supporting schools. It means ending the sub-minimum wage for Americans with disabilities so that we involve as many Americans as possible in the workforce. Anybody who wants to work should have that opportunity and should have their work valued. It means making sure that our teachers and people in the working world are trained on how to make sure that we engage people and get the best that they have to offer. And I want to let you know that our campaign needs your help too. As we are traveling the country, we want to make sure everybody knows how to contribute and everybody feels involved. This is about building a sense of belonging that lets all of us know where we fit. And autism should be no barrier to fully participating in the blessings of living in our communities and in our country. And that will be my guiding light as president. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being here.
What would you do about the $1 trillion of debt?
All right. So, again, if that's you, just holler, and I'll look right at you. Nope, too many people. I can't see you. Okay. So the time has come for my party to own this issue, because while even as the youngest candidate in the field, I'm old enough to remember Republicans talking a lot about the deficit and the debt, it turns out when they take office, it almost always gets worse. So time for us to own this issue. And yes, I do believe it matters. It matters because if we spend too much money servicing the debt, we wind up taking away funding from the programs we care about for schools and for infrastructure and for health. Sometimes, just like buying a house, sometimes it's smart to take out a loan. Sometimes the debt is getting out of control. And we've got to recognize the responsibility to do something about it, especially because my generation's probably going to be here when some of the consequences of time bombs in our fiscal situation, like the $1 trillion Trump tax giveaway, start to go off, and I want to make sure we're on top of that. So, what do we do about it? Well, you're going to notice that every plant, look, some of the stuff I'm saying we ought to do isn't cheap. I'm proposing over $1 trillion of investment in education. Medicare for all who want it is going to cost $1.5 trillion over the next decade. We got to invest in a big way in infrastructure. But everything that I'm proposing we invest, I'm also explaining how we're going to get the money. And we can get the money with reasonable increases to our expectations for what giant corporations and the wealthiest Americans pay, because they need to pay their fair share. We do that, we can keep all of our promises, and we can do it in a way that actually sees the debt shrinking instead of growing in our lifetime. And we should. Duplicate?
These have been answered, so we're just gonna. I think Mayor Pete covered a lot of these, so. What can be done about all the unqualified judges appointed to federal courts?
Ooh. All right. So, first of all, I'm going to appoint justices and judges who know what they're doing, respect American freedom, understand the importance of things like choice and voting rights, and will do their job not out of loyalty to a party, but out of an understanding of the Constitution and the country whose course it directs. Step one. But here's the thing, we probably are going to face this for the rest of our lives unless we take steps to depoliticize our courts, especially our Supreme Court. And it's why I have gone out on a limb and called for us to start looking at structural reforms. For example, I am not a legal scholar, but some people who are have proposed in the Yale Law Journal a way that you could have the Supreme Court reformed. Remember, the Supreme Court has changed about 6 times in our history. This would be another change. You would have 15 members, but only 10 of them could be appointed on a partisan basis. The other 5 could only take their seats if the other 10 unanimously agreed. So the idea is you would have some level of depoliticization of the bench. They call it a balanced bench. That might be the right answer. There might be another way to do it. Another proposal is you rotate folks from the appellate bench. I'm not saying I have it all figured out. I'm saying that I will set up a commission to entertain major, ambitious, serious reforms because we can't go on like this. You know, justices and judges used to retire like everybody else. Now we got folks timing their departure from the bench. Possibly it feels like some are feeling it necessary to time their departure from this earth based on who is in the Oval Office. It is no way to run the highest court in the land in the greatest country in the world. We've got to do better, and we've got to be willing to have structural reform as well as appointing the right people to the judiciary.
What do you plan to do about income inequality?
All right. So, you know, of all the complicated issues going on in our economy, we got to face the fact that the biggest one is abundantly simple. People in America are not getting paid enough. The minimum wage is not worth what it used to be. Do you know there's not one county in the United States of America where a full-time worker on the minimum wage could afford a 2-bedroom apartment? Not one county. One job ought to be enough. And making sure that's true starts with increasing the federal minimum wage and empowering union members and workers to organize into unions so that they can push for higher wages and better working conditions. Over the course of our lifetimes, income inequality has grown while union membership has fallen. That's not a coincidence. Policy decisions were made that undermined workers, and the result is that we see inequality off the charts, and we can't go on like this. Democracies don't survive this level of inequality for long. This is an emergency too. So not only do we need to boost wages, not only do we need to empower workers, and by the way, when we're empowering workers, that includes gig workers, because if you're doing a gig, as far as I'm concerned, you're doing a job, and that makes you a worker, and that means you deserve the protections and the support of labor policy that will allow you to organize and be paid well. And once again, we need a tax code that actually makes everybody pay their fair share. If you or I literally, personally, individually paid more dollars in federal income taxes last year than Amazon did on their billions of dollars in profits, something is wrong and we've got to fix the system.
How will you reconcile how hospitals charge for their services given they have trouble making a profit with the current system?
All right. I love it. A policy design question on healthcare. So look, this is really important, especially because we are seeing the closure and the loss of hospitals and clinics in rural areas. We've got to make sure that we're keeping our providers afloat. Again, everybody's talking about the insurance argument, but we're not hearing nearly enough about how to support hospitals. Now, not all hospitals are alike. We see some areas where you got monopolies, for-profit hospital systems consolidating and raking in profits, including surprise billing, where you find out after the fact that you had an out-of-network provider at your hospital and you're stuck with a shocking bill. which is why we got to control that. And I will not allow hospitals in those scenarios to be able to charge more than double what you would get on a standard rate just because they think they can. The other side of the coin is we do need to make sure that we increase the reimbursement rates and true them up so that if you're providing medical care, especially in an area that's hard to serve, we're supporting you. We cannot allow our rural communities to lose any more medical providers than we already have. And that will be recognized and reflected in our system.
What do you propose to tell people in Texas who want the wall, especially the elderly retired people?
So, first of all, you'd be surprised how many folks in Texas, even though it's a conservative state, are not a fan of these border policies, family separation. Even the president had to pretend he didn't know how that got started, because people in both parties understand that that is a moral stain on the country. And a wall just doesn't work. Part of what I'm going to say is that diverting funds from military families and housing in order to build a wall is a perfect example of the upside-down priorities in this White House today. The other thing is to make clear that we can be a country of values and a country of laws. Don't buy into this idea that if you're not for kids in cages, you must be for open borders. We're still going to have borders, we're still going to have laws, but we're going to have laws that make sense and that reflect the fact that immigration is part of the lifeblood of this country, including or especially in rural areas and here in the middle of the country, places like Iowa, places like Indiana. We will reform those laws, and then the enforcement won't be so difficult.
How will you handle Trump's bullying on the debate stage?
Oh, this is a fun one. All right. I'm not worried about Donald Trump. You notice he can't figure out what to do about me? Like he changes it every time I come up. I'm not worried about bullies. I'm gay and I grew up in Indiana. I'll be fine. I'm not worried about being called a socialist as somebody who worked with the private sector to create thousands of new jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in a city that had been described as dying at the beginning of this decade. I'm not worried about the chest-thumping militarism of somebody who avoided his turn to serve in the military, and I'll be happy to compare my record to his anytime. But here's the thing. When it comes to dealing with this president, the most important discipline that will be required of our nominee, the discipline I plan to carry on that debate stage, is to deprive him of his magical ability to change the subject, and usually to change the subject to himself. Of course, when he does something wrong, we're going to call it out. When he tells a lie, we're going to say what the truth is. When he does something racist, we're going to explain why it's racist. But we're going to go right back to our center of gravity, which is how we're going to make life better in this country. Because the more we're talking about him, the less we're talking about you. And the good news is we have the right answers when it comes to how to make your life better. We're trying to get you a raise. We're getting you health care. We're keeping this country safe from gun violence. We have the better answers. And the American people know it. And he knows it, which is why he's going to keep trying to get us arguing over stuff like whether we ought to buy Greenland instead of what we're doing to make sure that families across this country are going to be okay. And that is why when it comes to this show he's got going, this reality show or horror show, or I can think of a couple other words that end in show to describe what we got going on over there. If you go on the show and play by that game, you're never going to win. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up the remote and we're going to change the channel to something completely different and much better for the American people. Our time must have ended for questions, so one more big thank you to VAN for guiding that discussion and being your voice. And I want to end just by talking one more time about what it's going to take to bring about that change that we need so much. I want you to pause for a second and ask yourself why you're here. Not just to see me speak, hopefully, or to support this effort, or to learn a little bit more, but what propels you on a perfectly good, quiet Sunday afternoon to decide to come out here, battle the traffic, and join us this afternoon? I would argue that the fact that you are here represents an act of hope. That you would only think it is worth your time to do it if you think it matters who gets to Washington, who's in those big white buildings making decisions about our lives. And the same is true for running for office too. You only do it if you believe it matters. You only do it. Have you noticed that in news articles, they call us candidates hopefuls? They took hopeful and they made it into a noun, just for us. I think it's perfect, because running for office is an act of hope. You do it because we think that if we get the right hands and the right values on those pulleys and levers of government, our lives are going to get better. Not just policy by policy, but it will feel better. That we will know that we belong in this same country, in this same American project, and that we can lift one another up. That's the kind of hope that is propelling me through the state of Iowa and across the country. I believe it's the kind of hope that made it possible for an obscure mayor with an unpronounceable name to take the lead in the polling in Iowa and New Hampshire. And my question now as we head toward the caucus is what are we going to do for the folks who haven't yet caught that sense of hope that makes it worth being involved in this process, whether it's by showing up or volunteering or just caucusing itself? And the good news about hope is it's contagious. So my simple question to you is, can I look to you to spread that sense of hope to everybody you know and call them to be part of this new American majority that we are building for change? And are you ready to pick up the remote and change the channel from the Donald Trump reality show? Iowa, every indication is that if we keep doing the work and keep spreading the message, you will catapult me to the nomination and make me the next president of the United States. I will work to make you proud, and we will make history together. Thank you for being part of this movement. Thank you for spreading the word. Thank you for caring about the future. And I will see you on the campaign trail. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
My feet.